So if you're looking at CMMC readiness right now, you probably know exactly where the journey starts to get, well, difficult. Defining the scope.
Yeah.
It sounds simple enough, right? What data do we have? Where is it? But honestly, it's maybe the single biggest roadblock we see preventing companies from actually moving forward.
Oh, absolutely. It's the defining choice, really. Get the scope wrong, and you could easily spend months, maybe thousands of dollars, applying really stringent security controls to systems that, frankly, never needed them.
Right.
Or, maybe far worse, you miss a system and the entire assessment potentially fails just because of one sort of overlooked connection.
And that's really the mission for us today.
Yeah.
We want to give you a clearer roadmap, a way to understand CMMC scope definition. We're focusing particularly on the strategic need for clear system boundaries.
Exactly.
We want to help you save time, save costs, and just make sure you're defending the right systems, not, boiling the ocean.
Okay, so let's try to establish that line in the sand. When we talk about CMMC scope, what we really mean is every single system, device, and even process that stores, processes, or transmits, well, two specific kinds of data.
Right. FCI and CUI.
Exactly. Federal contract information, that's FCI, and the more sensitive, controlled, unclassified information, or CUI.
And what's kind of fascinating here is just how broad that scope definition becomes in practice. It's not just, say, the dedicated server drive or the specific cloud folder where the CUI actually sits, is it?
No, not at all. Absolutely. The scope extends often far beyond just the data repository itself. It really includes every system that supports or, importantly, controls access to that data.
Okay, like what?
Well, think about your identity management solution, right? Or your remote administrative tools, the things your IT team uses, even the systems you use for, say, patching or network monitoring. If they touch that CUI environment in any way, they're part of the scope, yeah.
And this brings us to that crucial rule of thumb, the one phrase that anyone going for CMMC really needs to, internalize.
Yes, it's this. If it touches CUI or touches something that touches CUI, it is in scope unless you can prove otherwise.
And that prove otherwise is key.
It is. The burden of proof is entirely on you, the organization, to demonstrate that separation. And this connection point, this touching something that touches CUI, that's what organizations consistently seem to underestimate.
Okay, wait. Let's really drill down on that phrase, touches something that touches CUI. Because I think that's the most common way scope just balloons unexpectedly, right? Scope creep.
Exactly.
You could have, say, perfectly isolated your CUI data itself, or maybe you have a shared service, like a single common Active Directory instance. And it's used by both your secure CUI network and maybe your regular corporate network, like your out-of-scope HR system.
Right, it happens all the time.
Doesn't that shared service suddenly put those HR systems at risk of being dragged into scope too? That feels, I don't know, almost like an unfair consequence sometimes.
Well, unfair or not, that's precisely the assessor's logic. Auditors, the C3PAOs, the certified third-party assessment organizations, they really operate on a kind of zero-trust model here.
Okay.
If System A, let's say your HR system, is managed by the same tool or the same process, or crucially, the same identity as System B, your CUI system, well then, System A inherently has the potential to influence the security of System B.
Because of that shared link.
Precisely. If that shared admin identity gets compromised over on this, let's say, non-compliant HR server, then your CUI environment could be compromised by proxy. It's a pathway.
Okay. So if you want to avoid applying all those, pretty rigorous NIST 800-171 controls to your entire corporate infrastructure.
Which you probably do.
Yeah, definitely. You have to build some serious technical fortresses around those shared services. It's not just about drawing a line on paper.
Correct. That's the technical nugget we really need to focus on here. To prevent that scope creep from, say, a shared Active Directory, you absolutely must implement strong identity separation mechanisms.
What does that look like practically?
That means things like establishing dedicated organizational units, OUS, within AD, having unique group policy objects, GPOs, applied just to them, and critically, using dedicated least privilege administrative accounts that only manage the CUI environment.
So separate keys for separate kingdoms.
Essentially, yes. That technical segmentation, that strict separation of duties and roles, that becomes your irrefutable proof to the assessor.
Which really highlights why boundaries aren't just some optional diagramming exercise. They're arguably the single most important strategic decision you make in this whole process.
Absolutely. They define, quite precisely where that controlled CUI environment begins and where it ends.
The strategic goal then is pretty straightforward.
Yeah, it's simple conceptually.
Hmm.
Contain the CUI within a clearly defined and well-protected enclave. Doing that limits your attack surface, it limits your exposure, and importantly for the process, it drastically limits the scope, cost, and time of the actual assessment.
Okay, so when we talk about defining those boundaries, we're usually looking at two main types, right? Physical and logical.
Yes, exactly. Physical boundaries are probably the easiest ones to visualize. Think, isolated servers and a locked rack, maybe dedicated locked rooms entirely, or specific dedicated workstations that only handle CUI and nothing else.
Old school, but clear.
Right. But more often, especially, in modern cloud-first or hybrid environments, we rely heavily on logical boundaries.
And logical boundaries are about using technology to create that separation, even if the underlying hardware might be physically connected or shared somewhere.
Precisely. We're talking about things like setting up separate domains, using virtual local area networks VLANs to effectively isolate network traffic, or creating dedicated secure enclaves within your cloud provider.
Okay, and this level of detail, the how, is what the assessors really focus on, the C3PAOs and the DoD reviewers.
Yes. They demand clarity on three specific points. First, they need to know very clearly what systems are in scope. That's the core CUI environment.
Exactly.
Second, they need to know what systems are explicitly out of scope, and crucially why, meaning what technical or procedural control is actually separating them from the CUI.
Okay, the justification.
And the third point, and honestly this is the one where many organizations seem to stumble, is how is that boundary actually enforced?
Right, not just that it's enforced, but how.
Exactly. It's simply not enough to draw a nice box on a Visio diagram or a whiteboard. You have to be able to show the specific firewall rules, the actual VLAN configurations, the documented access control lists, prove that the boundary is real, it's robust, and it's actively working.
So proof is mandatory, no trust, only verify.
Proof is absolutely mandatory. Assessors require documentation that perfectly mirrors the operational reality. That means up-to-date network diagrams, detailed data flow maps showing exactly how CUI enters, moves, and leaves.
Ingress and egress points.
Right. And the configuration documentation for the boundary systems themselves, all of it needs to live within your system security plan, your SSP. If you can't show the configuration actually aligning with the controls you claim are in place,
Then the auditor has to assume the boundary isn't really there.
or at least that it's porous, yeah. They have to assume the worst case if you can't prove otherwise.
Okay, so defining the line is definitely hard work. But what about the ways organizations kind of sabotage themselves, even when they think they've got the boundaries figured out? Let's talk about some common landmines here.
Yeah, good idea. The first one, maybe surprisingly, is often rooted in being too cautious, leading to overscoping.
Doing too much work.
Exactly. Companies, often fearing they'll miss something critical, just throw their hands up and assume all systems are in scope. This forces them into applying really complex, expensive controls derived from NIST 800-171 to systems that, only handle public website information or internal HR files or marketing data.
Stuff that has no CUI connection.
Right. If you use segmentation properly, your accounting systems, your HR systems, they probably should be out of scope. Don't volunteer for unnecessary work and cost.
Okay, so that's one side. But the flip side, the corollary, is maybe the more deadly one. Underscoping shared services. We already kind of hammered the Active Directory example earlier, but let's look at something like, say, centralized backup solutions. That seems common.
Very common and very risky if not handled right. If your shared backup environment has the capability to restore CUI data onto a non-compliant server, maybe accidentally.
Or worse, it gets compromised itself.
Right, or potentially inject malware into the CUI environment during some kind of recovery operation, then that entire backup system and potentially all its related management infrastructure is suddenly in scope. You have to protect the backup system just as strongly.
Wow, okay. That's a big one. What else?
Well, we absolutely have to address cloud complacency. This is huge now.
The lift and shift solves everything myth.
Exactly. The mistake is thinking that just moving your data to, say, an environment like Microsoft's GCC High or AWS GovCloud automatically creates a compliant security boundary and you're done.
It doesn't.
It absolutely doesn't. While those platforms provide a very secure foundation, your organization is still responsible for managing dozens, maybe hundreds of specific level 2 controls within that environment.
So the cloud provider handles the physical stuff, but you still own the configuration.
You own the configuration, the access control, the monitoring. The boundary doesn't just magically end at the cloud instance itself. It actually shifts. It shifts to controlling your endpoints that connect to it, your identity provider settings, and ensuring things like strong multi-factor authentication, ideally MFA meeting FIPS 142 requirements, is enforced before anyone gets near that CUI environment in the cloud.
Okay, so the mistake is basically transferring the data, but kind of forgetting to transfer the responsibility for implementing and improving the controls around it.
Precisely put, yeah. And the final and often fatal pitfall is failing to document exclusions properly.
Just saying it's out of scope isn't enough.
Not even close. You cannot simply state, oh, that system is out of scope. The auditor will always ask, okay, why is this excluded? And how do you know it cannot possibly impact the security of CUI?
You need the receipts.
You need the receipts. If you exclude a system, your SSP must explicitly list it. It needs to provide the clear technical rationale for its exclusion. And it must describe the specific controls, the firewall rule set, the VLAN configuration, the access control policy that actually enforce that separation. If the network diagram or the configurations don't back up your statement,
It's back in scope by default.
it's back in scope.
Yeah.
Simple as that for the assessor.
Wow. Okay, this all really rolls up into needing a very clear roadmap, a practical approach. So for you, the listener, who might be thinking, okay, I need to start defining these boundaries today, let's lay out a straightforward, maybe 5-step framework that can help streamline this whole process.
The plan.
All right, step 1. Map your data flows. Really start with the CUI itself. Identify precisely how it enters your environment, how it moves laterally between systems or people, and how it eventually exits. You simply can't secure a boundary if you haven't tracked the asset it's supposed to protect.
Foundational. You need to know where the sensitive stuff is and where it goes.
Step 2. Create an asset inventory and label every asset clearly. Is it definitely in scope? Is it clearly out of scope? Or is it maybe a boundary system itself, like a firewall or router that facilitates the separation? Be specific.
That inventory becomes your ground truth for applying controls.
Step 3. Segment your network. This is where the technical implementation happens. Actually use the tools VLANs, dedicated firewalls, maybe dedicated logical domains or cloud resource groups to enforce that physical and logical isolation you've planned. Build the digital moat, essentially.
Right. Make the boundary real in the technology.
Step 4. Document absolutely everything. Maintain up-to-date network diagrams, clear boundary descriptions, data flow diagrams, all within your system security plan. Remember, that documentation isn't just paperwork, it's the primary evidence the auditor is going to scrutinize.
If it's not documented effectively, it didn't happen from an audit perspective.
And crucially, step 5, test and monitor. Segmentation is only truly useful if it actually works and keeps working. You have to continuously validate that your firewalls, your access controls, your VLANs are actively functioning as intended, and that nobody's accidentally poking holes or creating bypasses.
Yeah, configuration drift is real. You set it up once, but you have to keep checking that it stays that way. That testing is critical.
So that 5-step process: map, inventory, segment, document, test.
That framework really defines the maturity of your whole security posture for CMMC. Compliance, fundamentally, isn't just about implementing security controls. It's about being able to prove you understand where your sensitive data is, and therefore where those security controls absolutely must apply.
And like we said at the start, that begins with defining the boundary.
It absolutely does. Defining your scope and your boundaries clearly and early, it allows you to focus your limited resources effectively. It drastically reduces audit stress later on. And frankly, it demonstrates a level of maturity and precision to your assessors that builds confidence.
So the final thought for our listeners:
if you're just starting your CMMC journey, or maybe feeling stuck, and you're unsure exactly where your CUI boundary begins and ends, that uncertainty itself tells you where to start. That is the perfect essential place to focus your energy first. Get that boundary defined, documented, and locked down. Because if your perimeter is fuzzy,
the whole environment is potentially vulnerable.
the whole environment is effectively vulnerable in the eyes of CMMC. Start at the edge.